Goring, from Nikki, Aurora, and from me. Well, today I have a very special guest, Tom Sykes, the international, really celebrated columnist on the Daily Beast, who does the Royalist, and who is absolutely just so intelligent, informed, etc. Without further ado, I am going to turn this over to the interview I have done with Tom, because he has done a very interesting piece with regards to the 28th anniversary of Diana, Princess of Wales's death. And he has very interesting ideas about her death and about the anomalies that have arisen as a result of the various investigations into her death that really raise questions. I mean, as many of you might know, I wrote a posthumous biography called The Real Diana, in which I went into some detail in investigating the circumstances of her death, and I updated it in, I think, an addendum chapter. So we do not always agree with each other, but everything he says is well worth hearing, whether I agree with it or not. So without further ado, I now turn you over to my interview with him.
Georgie, hi.
Oh, my dear Tom, how are you? Lovely to see you. Looking very dashing and dapper in the true tradition of the Sykes males.
Well, Georgie, isn't it nice to have an excuse to put on a jacket and tie? And I know that you're always immaculately dressed for your devoted viewers, so I couldn't let the side down.
Well, welcome, my dear. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, you have certainly caused a few ructions and created a few waves with your latest piece on Diana. So do let me be led by you.
Well, thanks, Georgie, and thanks for having me on to talk about this. So, as of course everybody will know, this weekend was 28 years since Princess Diana died in a car crash in an underpass in Paris. There's always been questions about the crash, I suppose. I think sometimes when I talk to my own kids about this, I know who Diana is, but of course it's important to remind younger viewers just how pivotal a figure Diana was. Of course, you know, from the age when she was 20, when she married, you know, Charles, and they were always pictured together looking so unhappy, and the marriage was so unhappy. And then, of course, your extraordinary biography of Diana, which revealed all these sensational information, the fact that she had this eating disorder, and of course, the fact that Charles had had an affair with Camilla almost throughout the entire marriage. I mean, from before it and almost throughout it. And of course, that is your reporting that broke that open. Lots of people think that it was Andrew Morton, but it wasn't. You got there first. And I remember people rubbished you and said that it was all nonsense and who was this woman saying these awful things. And then, of course, 6 months later, Diana, her true story came out, and it was all subsequently proven to be true. So that's just I think it's important to remember just what a massive figure Diana was. She was literally the most famous person on the planet. And of course, she divorced Charles in
96.
I want to say 96. And she had given the Panorama a famous interview with BBC, a show called Panorama in 1994, I think.
95,
in
November
95,
95, yeah.
95, in which she'd said,
you were very young at the time.
I was very young. In which she had said that she didn't think Charles wanted to be king, and that she didn't believe he was suitable to be king. thereby suggesting that the monarchy should skip a generation. Now, this was absolutely incendiary stuff. At that time, they were still married. They were trying to have this kind of accommodation where they'd live apart and have their own things going on, but they were technically still married. Uh, and of course, the absolute massive interest in Diana that came out of that BBC interview when she spoke about Charles having affairs. She spoke about her having she admitted that she had an affair with James Hewitt. The famous line, there were three of us in the marriage. It was very crowded. And you and I remember it every Sunday. All the newspapers were full of people. I mean, people think the thing about Harry and Meghan these days is divisive. My God, was Diana divisive.
Yes.
People hated her. Oh, they loathed her. They were viperous about her. They wrote the most awful things about her. She was deranged. She was mad. She was paranoid. All the things that have been used through the eras to denigrate and demean, strong and powerful women, in my opinion, were targeted at Diana. And so she had various relationships with various people. Then that summer of 1997, she was in a relationship with Dodie Fiat, the son of Mohammed Fiat, of course, the owner of Harrods, a brand that could hardly be more synonymous with the British aristocracy and wealth and splendor. And off they went to the south of France. They were pursued by photographers. Famous photographs of them on the yacht, some of the very last, very poignant photos of Diana. They tried to escape the photographers. They went to Paris to the Ritz Hotel, which was owned by the Fiat family office.
May I cut you there?
Yeah.
Diana, when you say they tried to escape the photographers, I spoke to several of them, and Diana made sure that they knew her escape route.
Well, that's very true. That is very true. Diana was an early exponent of the art of saying how terrible photographers were and tipping them off on the sly.
But
She knew what she knew what she was doing. She was always briefing the media. Famously Richard Kay, and of course all of the tapes passed to Andrew Morton. But yes, she did. And there was one chap, Jason something, I can't remember what his last name was, who was definitely always being tipped off.
There was a photographer called Saunders who she
Right.
tipped off as well. But I mean, she
Right.
a couple of them off. And there's that wonderful mention in Nicholas Coleridge's memoirs of having, Diana. He has Diana to lunch at Vogue House. And of course, that absolutely no press should be there. Nobody must know about it. It's top secret. And he's walking her out to her car afterwards. And lo and behold, there is a photographer. And they snap her. And then he discovers that sweet, innocent Diana, who absolutely hated the press, had tipped off the photographer.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. She'd have long conversations with journalists. And photographers. And look,
But let's not divert.
yeah, back to the story.
Get back onto your momentum,
So,
please.
but the point why I'm saying all this is so then they flee the south of France. They go to Paris to the Ritz. They are at the Ritz for the evening, and of course besieged by photographers again, very likely because Diana has tipped them off. And so at the last minute they decide to go to Dodie, to the family's private apartment. So they leave the hotel just after midnight. They go speeding through the streets of Paris with a huge mob of photographers chasing them on motorbikes. Don't forget, these photographs, you took one great photograph of Princess Diana, you could pay off your mortgage. Do you know what I mean? These were incredibly valuable photographs. So the huge mob of motorcycle riders and pillion riders screaming after the car. And then, as we all know, 12:13, the car enters the tunnel, the underpass of the Pont Alma, and mysteriously smashes in to the 13th pillar, killing three of the people in the car. Henry Paul, the driver, is killed instantly. Dodie, another passenger, is killed instantly. Diana dies at 4 o'clock that morning, and the Sunday newspapers the next day have to insert apologetic little slips of paper into their supplements, which are all full of hideous pieces condemning Diana for being this ghastly woman getting involved with the interfering in the sale of landmines, and generally saying how awful she is going on the south of France with this terrible, sleazy Fiat family. And so there they all are, all these little, and I remember those little slips of paper saying, "Oh, we're terribly sorry for all those awful things we said about Saint Diana. We take them all back." And what what then happened was that the French police procedures, immediately in the aftermath of the crash, were, I think, really slapdash. I mean, and that's the kindest way to put it. All kinds of strange things happened. The weirdest one I often think is that the carriageway was reopened in under 12 hours under the underpass. It's a dual carriageway. I mean, you could have easily kept one of the carriageways closed.
Actually, may I cut you there and say,
Mm.
in 1996, I think it was, may have been 97, I think it, or maybe even 98, I took my children to some dyslexic thing in Orlando, Florida. And there was an accident that took place about 6 cars ahead of us, and people died in it. And we were on one of the, I think it's the I-95 or whatever it is, very important motorway. And within 4 hours, and we couldn't move, but within 4 hours, they had cleared the motorway. They had taken all the evidence that they needed. They cleared the motorway and they opened it. It's only in England, Tom, that's sorry to say this, that when there's an accident, 3 days later, they're still faffing around to find evidence.
I'm going to speculate that your crash on the I-95 didn't involve the most famous person on the planet.
But it shouldn't make a difference. But
Well, I mean, it should make a difference, and I think that scene should have been completely preserved. The other, the Pont Alma is a dual carriageway, and they certainly should have diverted all the traffic into the other tunnel for 24 hours, and it should have just been made two-way, the other tunnel, for 24 hours. I find it weird, and Operation Paget, when it looked at, because so then, sorry, so just to pick up the story again, so the French police did their immediate aftermath stuff, and then they did an inquiry and obviously found they hadn't done anything wrong. And then Mohammed Fayed complained essentially to the British police that there had been a cover-up by the security services. And in response to that, the Metropolitan Police did something that you're going to hear a lot about over the next 40 minutes, called Operation Paget, which was an investigation of Fayed's claims. And then there's one more thing, which is the inquest into her death, which uses a lot of the information from Paget. So that's why people often say there were 3 inquiries into three investigations into her death: the French one, Paget, and the inquest. So what's really interesting is that, for example, this question of why was the tunnel reopened so quickly? In Paget, they kind of say, well, it wasn't ideal, but it's just the way people do things in France. And over again in Paget, what you see is whenever anomalies are raised, they just say, that's how they do things in France. And I know something that we're going to talk about is a really good example of this, is the ambulance going to the hospital, which I spoke to you about earlier in the week. And I know what you're going to say, so I'm going to get my defense in first. And they just say, because people always say, why did the ambulance take an hour to get to the hospital? And the French just say, well, we do things differently. You know, we have, our ambulances are amazing. And so we put people in them and they're like a mini ICU unit, and we take our time getting to the hospital. And then Paget is always able to sort of say, oh, everything got lost in translation, either cultural translation or literal translation. That's just how they do things. That's just how they do things. It's like everything is like hiding in plain sight. So
Mm.
even when Paget says this wasn't great, it then says in the same breath, but that's just how they do things in France. They're too busy eating their snails and what have you, to do a proper investigation. It was the weekend and they didn't want to work because they're French or whatever. It's like,
But
it's,
it was
I'm not
August.
saying they say that.
It was August, and the whole of France is on holiday.
Oh, France on holiday. Exactly. Exactly.
Literally.
So that's the other issue. But I do think if you subscribe, like me, to the theory that she was murdered, I think it was very, very clever to do it in a foreign jurisdiction because it means that everything gets lost in translation.
Mm.
Everything gets filtered through all these different police forces. And by the time you end up at the inquest, many, many, many years later, the best they can come up with is she was basically killed by the drunk driver and persons unknown who are the paparazzi following her. This is another amazing question. You've been I've been a journalist. When you show up at a job, you know everybody there, right? And certainly in 1997, when cameras were expensive, you know, all of those paparazzi knew who each other were. So why are none of them ever identified? Harry raises this point in his book. Who were these people? Who were they? Just a bunch of people following her. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's inconceivable if Kate Middleton was killed in a crash tomorrow that we wouldn't know all of the people who were following, who were trying to take the photographs. It just, to me, there's all these things that just don't add up. But say the thing about the ambulance, because it is really interesting, and that's the counterpoint. And I know you have experience of it.
Well, yes. In Britain, we don't have the SAMU the way they do in France. The SAMU is literally a vehicular intensive care unit. And when and it took a long time to get her to the hospital because Diana's fatal injury was actually a very slight injury. It was a tear to the pulmonary vein, not the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein. And she had one other injury that again was very slight, which was to her forehead, because when she wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and at the point of impact, she hit the roof of the car, and that gave her a gash, but not a very big gash on her forehead. And her other injury, which was an impact injury, was at the point of impact, her heart was literally torn out of its socket and removed back into more in the center of her chest. And that impact caused a slight tear to the pulmonary vein. Once she had that injury, death was inevitable because it wasn't visible, it wasn't obvious, it was slight enough that it took time for her to bleed out, but she was always going to bleed out. And my brother-in-law, who's a top cardiologist in the United States of America, I ran all of this by him. And he said that she was very lucky that they couldn't save her because she would have been a total vegetable. And
Mm, mm,
but they, Dr. Mayo, I think was his name. I can't remember exactly his name, but
mm,
I interviewed him. And in fact, the following year at Goldsmiths College, we lectured together about Diana's death. Interestingly enough, it was such a big deal at the time that he and I
mm.
were invited to lecture at Goldsmiths College on the anniversary of her death. And he
Yeah.
was before me, and then we were talking up. But I'd interviewed him to write my book, The Real Diana, the posthumous biography.
Mm,
And
mm,
he's the one who happened upon her totally coincidentally. And he was the very first person to be on the scene and to deal with her. And he turned her around because she was back to front, in between the seats.
mm,
The impact had flipped her so she was facing backwards. And she was dazed, and she was saying things along the lines of, my God, what has happened? I mean, she was totally dazed, but he
mm,
was she was conscious, but confused. And he moved
mm,
her and made her comfortable, which meant that having moved her, she was inevitably going to start to die. Had they been able, which of course was impossible, to keep her in the position that she was, and had they known what the injury was, and had they got her to the hospital, and had they been able to have the time to open her up, there was a maybe 0.00001% chance that she could have survived. But otherwise, so he moved her, made her comfortable, and at that point she started to bleed out. Because in much the same way that if you are stabbed with a knife and they do not remove the knife, you stand a chance of survival. But once they remove the knife, if it's, say, to a major artery or vein, you will bleed out. And but because it was a slight tear, she bled out relatively slowly. So once he moved her, she immediately started to bleed out and immediately started to lose consciousness. The SAMU came, the doctors and other SAMU people, they attended to her. They moved her into the really mobile intensive care unit. But the motion of the vehicle meant that every time they drove a certain length, just the motion of the vehicle was causing her to bleed out. So they could, and that's why they kept on stopping, because they didn't know what her injury was, but they knew she was bleeding out, and they tried to stabilize her.
Yeah.
It wasn't, they weren't trying to, having caused an injury, they were going to make sure that she died. I mean, it wasn't anything like that.
But one thing we do agree on is that the accident itself was precipitated by the collision with the white Fiat Uno, I believe. And do you remember, I was working at the Evening Standard. It was my first summer in journalism. I was working at the Evening Standard, and I just remember these rumours kept coming in about this white Fiat Uno, and the French police just wouldn't confirm it and wouldn't confirm it. It was months until they confirmed that this white Fiat Uno had tipped the vehicle. And I believe you have an eyewitness who saw the collision with the white Fiat Unos. Is that correct? Somebody who's actually saw it happen?
No, I can't remember if I do. Sorry. I wrote the book
No.
28
But the
years.
people on the tunnel, the people above the tunnel who saw the engine roaring.
Oh, no, okay, yeah. That I spoke to them, and because there were witnesses above, because it's an underpass, but
Yeah.
there is a pedestrian bit above the underpass.
Yeah.
And there were people there, and they actually, I think, also gave evidence in all of the inquiries.
Right.
And I mean, there's an awful lot of evidence from an awful lot of eyewitnesses, because I don't recall that they actually saw the clipping, but there was the residue of the Mercedes and the white Fiat on the periphery part of it. So they were able to establish that from the little bits of detritus that
it had clipped a white Fiat.
Clipped the white Fiat.
But it was weird. What I'm saying was so weird was how that was totally denied for ages. Then there were these rumours that the car had been resprayed, that the white Fiat had been resprayed days later. Then the weirdest coincidence of all, guess who happens to own a white Fiat? James Andanson, a freelance photographer, falsely, I have to say, sometimes claimed to be a spy. He was not a spy. He was a photographer. And Andanson owned a white Fiat, and the police ruled that white Fiat out. They said, "Oh no, it couldn't have been that one because that one had 300,000 miles on the clock." Well, I mean, anyone who's been to Paris knows that Parisians pride themselves in driving terrible old bangers around the streets of Paris because they get so dinged and they get so battered. I mean, the idea that a car couldn't drive fast because it had a mere 300,000 miles on the clock. And incidentally, cars were much better made probably 30 years ago than they are today. And these electric piece of rubbish that break. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. And then, of course, the really extraordinary thing is what happened to James Andanson afterwards.
He committed
He
suicide.
he committed suicide and was found in a burnt out car, having committed suicide in the year 2000 with a hole in his head that
Yes.
the police said was caused by the fire, the intensity of the blaze.
Mm.
You know, I'm sure like the intensity of the blaze could, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that there is a possibility that it can melt a piece of your skull and cause a hole in your head. But it seems more likely that a hole in your head would be caused by other causes. And then 6 weeks later, his offices are broken into and all his stuff is stolen. And again, like Paget is so interesting about this because it says, because Fiat raises this, right? Fiat says, well, here's this guy, right? He's got a white Fiat. He's a freelance photographer. He's committed suicide. He's found with a hole in his head, and his offices are broken into 6 weeks later, and all his stuff is stolen. And the English police just say, well, we checked with the French police, and they said nothing important was stolen. I mean, it's just, you know, it's just absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And
Well,
I
I have,
agree that
I
that is
have.
not evidence of murder, but it's definitely evidence that there is way more going on here than we have been
But
told.
Tom, I have no doubt that in a situation like that, where there was so much scrutiny on the performance and at times ineptitude of all the people involved, that they would have been covering up their ineptitude. And
Mm.
so it's not as if to say there's nothing there. It's just to what extent does one regard something as leading in one direction or another? I mean, James Andanson was very much a sort of a well, dodgy figure, let's see. But the conclusions I came to, and I mean, I did write the book 28 years ago, so I'm struggling to remember exactly but I do remember the basics. And the conclusion I came to, because as I was very dispassionate, I believe in letting the evidence lead me to its conclusion. And the the white Fiat, let's remember, especially in 97, there were an awful lot of illegals in France, and they often drove clapped out old bangers.
Yeah.
And the white Fiat was indubitably a clapped out old banger. Because the paintwork indicated what model, what age, what etc. it was.
Mm.
Could just as easily have been some illegal who is clipped very slightly, because it was a very slight clip. And it was such a slight clip that, I mean, it's possible that the driver of the white Fiat either didn't notice or thought, well, it's no big deal, and just drove on. And also, if you are an illegal and you are clipped by a fancy, big, chauffeur-driven Mercedes,
Mm.
and you're not going to stop to complain, especially when it's bombing across the road. And so I didn't think that was particularly ominous, because the only four people who knew the route that the car was going to take were the four people in it. And
But do you not think, sorry, just to clarify, do you not think that any collision at high speed either could have triggered the airbags or could have caused a kind of chaotic moment of panic that precipitated the crash?
oh, I actually said in my book that it is the clipping of the vehicle that caused the airbags to deploy, because the
Yeah.
evidence was very clear that the airbags had deployed, and
And they deployed early.
that's
They
right.
deployed before it hit the pillar.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so the only possibility, the only time that they could have deployed was when the Fiat was clipped by the Mercedes. And
Yeah.
ironically enough, if you are maybe too young to know, but in 1997 there was a huge debate about enforcing seat belts, and people were saying this is a violation of my human rights. If I don't want to have on a seatbelt, I shouldn't, etc. So there was all of that going on at the time. And I think that the cover-up has been with the governments and the automotive industry, because what they didn't want the public to know was that it doesn't even need to be a high-speed impact. It can be a low-speed impact. Will deploy the seatbelts, which is precisely,
Mm.
sorry, not the
The
seatbelts,
airbags. Yeah.
which is
Mm.
precisely what happened.
Mm.
And the evidence is very clear, because Henri Paul put the car into neutral. Henri Paul was a trained driver, so to avoid kidnapping and all the rest of it. He was trained to a very high standard in terms of avoiding and terrorism. And let's remember that Gaddafi, that Fiat knew that there was a contract out on him from Colonel Gaddafi.
Mm-hmm.
He
Mm-hmm.
knew it.
Right.
And that's why he and Dodie always wore clip-on ties, because the story in Middle Eastern circles was that he had not got the money from the Sultan of Brunei. He had got it from Colonel Gaddafi, and had then double-crossed Gaddafi,
Mm.
used to pay him back the money. Hence,
Right.
and in the first 24 hours after Diana's death, the Middle East was awash with stories, because remember, I'm part Lebanese, so I have a lot of connections into the Middle East.
Right.
Also, I used to be Colonel Gaddafi's primary ambassador in the world's private secretary. So I also had Libyan connections. But also I was
The
friendly.
rich tapestry of Lady Colin's life.
Well, I was very friendly. Sweet of you to say, because you know an awful lot about my family, and I know a lot about yours, because we're family friends for ages. But the point I'm making is that there, there was, no, I've lost my train of
Well,
thought.
no, I see what you're saying. Could I ask, actually, I think it's really interesting about the Fiat Uno and the seatbelts, and what you're saying about the automobile industry and the fact that the airbags might have deployed early.
They did
Could I
deploy.
ask you
They did deploy.
that
There's
they
no
did
doubt
deploy
about it.
early? Yeah, yeah.
Because there was an eyewitness, a couple in front the car, another old banger. They were an Algerian couple. In when the Mercedes went into the tunnel, it went
Mm.
with a roar, and this
Yeah.
is the evidence of the
Oh, yeah.
pedestrians above,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
a car, an automatic car cannot roar in drive. It roars in neutral. And the car was in neutral. Why was the
Mm.
car in neutral? The car wasn't in neutral when it set off towards
Mm.
the tunnel. So the only rational explanation for why Henri Paul put the car in neutral, and I checked with Mercedes, it's not
Mm.
possible for the car to have been put in neutral by the impact. He put the car in neutral. The only reason why he would have put the car in neutral was when the airbags deployed, because he understood, being a train driver, if the car was in neutral, it would follow its own path, while anything he did could be the wrong thing. But the
Mm.
fatal problem was when the airbags went down and he realized in the tunnel that he was possibly going to smash into the in the old bang, the Algerian couple. He swung out of that lane into the other lane, but the car was still in neutral.
Mm.
A car in neutral, you have no control over, no
Mm.
proper control over the steering. And that's what caused the accident. It was an error of judgment. But well, we're going to be taking ages to discuss all of this. All of this took place in a matter of maybe 5 to 7 seconds,
Yeah.
you know? And
Mm.
I mean, the girl in the car, she saw the car hit the 13th column. She saw which was the engine that crashed, that concertinaed in and crushed and snapped
Mm.
and
Yeah.
and crushed. Sorry, I need to get rid of that. that that crushed and snapped Henri Paul's spine and Dodie's spine, because the engine is what caused it, snapped both their spines. So if she could have seen that, it means that the
Yeah.
airbags had to have deployed before.
Already.
It's the only
Early. Yeah.
thing that makes sense if you follow
Yeah.
the evidence of what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's really interesting about this thing about the Fiat Uno and the precipitating the crash is that everybody you speak to more or less agree, most people agree that the crash really was precipitated by the collision with the Fiat Uno. But of course, the narrative in the weeks and months afterwards, when the existence of the Fiat Uno was really resisted by the French police, was that Henri Paul was, and I quote, as drunk as a pig. That was the phrase that they used. They used that phrase on the morning of the crash before they'd done any research about it. And if you ask anybody, normal person, about the Diana crash, what do you think caused it? Everybody says a drunk driver, right? That's completely received wisdom. And I just find it really, really weird that his blood tests were adulterated. At least one of his blood tests was adulterated, and that's admitted by Paget. The blood test, as you will know, said that
the carbon monoxide
said that he had 20% carbon monoxide. And the conclusion of Paget, and this is there in the Paget report, the conclusion is the blood tests were probably screwed up by the French lab. And I'm just like, hang on a second. This is the most high profile crash in modern British history that changed the face of the country, that changed the face of, the monarchy, that changed the way that the monarchy interacted with the people. And you're prepared just to say, oh, the blood test must have been wrong. And yet, the blood tests that suit you, the ones that show that he's completely pissed, and as Harry says in his book, shit-faced, those are fine. We're not going to argue with them. And
but can I say, Tom?
Yeah.
I think that the evidence, again, and we need to follow the evidence. The evidence is absolutely clear that whatever he had to drink, he was in total command of his faculties. 90 seconds before he got into that car, he was down on his haunches, tying his shoelaces. There's video footage of this.
Yeah.
He had a pasty or two. And let's remember, the French drink. And if you are capable, and you may have some alcohol in your system, but that doesn't mean that you are incapable. He can't.
No, in those days, they still sold wine at lunch at the service stations at the relay. When you went in as the set lunch, you still got a carafe of wine.
That's right. That's right. And there's no doubt that Henri Paul was set up to be the fall guy.
Yeah.
There was absolutely no way that anybody in their right mind could say that he was incapable. You can't, 90 seconds before you get into a vehicle, which then crashes about 2 minutes later, that you are
ridiculous.
In that time you have become totally incapable. And I certainly don't put it past the French authorities to have tampered with the evidence to make out that he was somehow responsible, because I lived in France for 14 years,
Mm, mm,
chateau in the south of France and a flat in Paris, and I have
mm.
to tell you that the French can be very, shall we say, self-preservative, and they will orchestrate things in such a way that they are blameless and they stick the blame on someone.
Absolutely. And
And
if you look at what Harry himself said about this in his memoir, I'm going to read this. In his memoir Spare, he says that they talk about the crash after the verdict of the inquest. Afterwards, William and I talked about the crash for the first time ever. We talked about the recent inquest. A joke, we both agreed. The final report was an insult, fanciful, riddled with factual errors and gaping logical holes. It raised more questions than it answered. After all those years, we said, and all that money, how? Above all, the summary conclusion that Mummy's driver was drunk and therefore the sole cause of the crash was convenient and absurd. Even if the man had been drinking, even if he was shit-faced, he wouldn't have had any trouble navigating that short tunnel.
no, he wouldn't have had any problem navigating it had the Fiat not been clipped by and his car is the one that he was desperate to get across into the tunnel because the paparazzi, which incidentally Diana had tipped off. And let's remember that there was absolutely no need for Diana and Dodie to leave the Ritz to go to the Fiat flat. The only reason why they left was Diana loved the chase and she
Bit of
loved
drama.
drama.
Yeah.
And Dodie was thrilled to be a part of it as well.
Mm,
But
mm,
there was
mm.
the absolute motivation for leaving the safety of the Ritz, where nobody had access to them. I mean, the Fiat flats well, you know the whole situation. I don't need to explain it to you. It's
Can I
just
ask you a question?
Mm.
How serious do you think the relationship was between Diana and Dodie?
Well, I can only tell you what I was told. And what I was told was very decisive. Elsa Boca, Lady Boca, who some people are calling Lady Elsa Boca, but you and I will know she was just Lady Boca. Her husband, her late husband, was a knight who had been an ambassador. And Elsa was half Egyptian, half Lebanese. So I knew her through my Lebanese connections. She was a fabulous old lady. She must have been about 90 at the time.
Yeah.
She was a great friend of Diana's. She loved young people. She was splendid. She told me what Diana had told her. Also, a great friend of mine whose son actually is still in business with the Khashoggis. And the Khashoggis hated Mohammed Fayed because remember, Dodie's mother was A.K. Adnan Khashoggi's sister, and
Right.
the Khashoggis absolutely hated Mohammed Fayed,
Mm.
and so Dodie was half a Khashoggi, and Dodie had told his step uncle, if I remember correctly, it was the same day he died, that he had proposed to Diana and she had accepted. Father Jeli at the St. Mary Abbots had confirmed that Diana had spoken to him about marrying Dodie and him marrying them. All of this suggests that she was proposed to by and accepted the hand of Dodie. There's no
And
doubt.
there's footage. There is CCTV footage, again, confirmed in Paget, of him buying the Tell Me Yes ring at the jeweller's.
Oh, at the
You know,
Reposy. Yes.
yeah,
He ordered it and then he picked it up from Reposy.
yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
mean, look, it's just a ring. It doesn't mean
uh,
he'd asked her or she'd agreed. But
well,
I
but
think when you as you said, I knew that story from you before. But and I think that's what is so interesting is that there clearly was, you know, as Fiat always claimed, the relationship clearly was very serious.
It was.
And I do honestly find the weirdest thing of the whole thing, the embalming of the body. Now, I know what everyone's going to say. They're going to say it's completely normal in the West to drain all the in France to drain all the blood out of the body and destroy it and replace it with embalming fluid. Um, that may be, but you do when the most famous person in the world is dead in your hospital, I think you take a breath and you pause. And I don't think you do anything that could destroy the tissue sample. Sorry, so just to recap, Diana was embalmed. She died at 4 o'clock in the morning. She was embalmed at around 12 noon. And then Charles arrived later that afternoon. I think she was flown home at 6 o'clock that evening. And you know the excuse given, the reason given by in the French by the French police was A, this is the custom. B, it was very hot. C, we wanted Diana to look presentable when she was viewed by her ex-husband and sisters. And I mean, I'm just like,
What you're
come
right there,
on.
that makes no sense at all, because a body would not decompose quite so quickly.
Exactly. Exactly. It's absurd. It's an absurd argument. And I mean, for God's sake, we have air conditioning, don't we? I mean, it's an absolutely absurd argument.
Well,
And
you
I
know,
think that it just really does suggest to me I don't think anyone will ever know, but I think there's a chance that people thought she was pregnant. Put it that way.
there is no doubt that there was the story circulating that she was. In fact, I mentioned this in my book and mentioned the name of one of the doctors an English doctor who was in touch with the French doctors at La Pitié-Salpêtrière. And
Mm,
for the first 3 days, Diana's medical notes floated throughout the hospital, and all sorts of doctors saw the notes and they
mm,
reported back to their friends abroad. One of them
mm,
was somebody I knew, and I mention it in my book that
mm.
there was the let's be gentle and kind about this, and let us sort of fudge the issue by being diplomatic, by saying there was the speculation that she might have been a few weeks pregnant.
Yeah.
But the way to absolutely eliminate any possibility of that emerging as a fact would have been to embalm her body.
Yeah.
So that is a reason for embalming her body. It equally, they could have simply just done it with the approval of the family, because let's remember, it's the Spencer family that were in charge of everything at that point. It wasn't Charles, and it wasn't the
Yeah,
Queen.
but nobody was there. Like it was just done on it doesn't seem to me that permission was sought to embalm the body. It was just done. And then it was like, that's how we do things here. Again, it's this excuse.
Well,
That's how we just do things in Paris in a Saturday, Sunday morning in August
that's what they're
when
saying.
everyone's on holiday.
That's what they're saying now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt that there were an awful lot of, shall we be gracious and say, inconsistencies,
Yeah.
and that there were cover-ups. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there were a series of cover-ups for different reasons. I'm just not sure that the cover-ups lead to the cover-up conclusion that is.
It was masterminded by a figure. Yeah, sure. No, I can accept that. What can I ask you? What do you think of the mahogany box and the contents of it going disappearing? So again, so this is
Oh yeah.
Diana had this mahogany box in which she had a tape of an aggrieved, shall we put it this way, staff member
George
who basically
Smith.
claimed
George Smith.
George Smith, exactly, who essentially accused, and I think we're okay to say this these days, but he essentially accused Charles and Fawcett of having relations.
Don't say more than that. We get the point.
Yes, yes, exactly. And this has been well rehearsed at this stage. And so into this box went an account of this alleged matter made by Smith, who was having a nervous breakdown, as far as I can understand, at the time. Um, and into the box also went other tapes that she had made. One or two of the videotapes did subsequently emerge, didn't they, of her talking to the therapist? But we don't know what else went in. Paul Burrell apparently knew what went in, knew that, and it seems to me like this was her insurance policy, this was her backup policy. And what's really fascinating is that in the okay, so this is from the Diana inquest in 2007. This is a verbatim transcript, and this is an interrogation of Sarah McCorkdale, Diana's sister. Counsel, after your sister's death, did you collect a mahogany box from Kensington Palace? Yes, I did. When you first checked the box, were its contents intact? Yes, they were. What happened next? I took it to Althorp. At some point later, when it was next opened, items were missing. Do you know what those items were? I do not wish to say. Do you know who removed them? No. So the dynamite evidence that Diana has that's going to, prove everything she said is right, that is going to, tear up her husband's plan to be king. She dies, the box is relocated and moved, and then all the contents go missing. I mean, like, it's very, very, very convenient for Charles that the contents of that box not only went missing, but never re-emerged.
Well,
Now,
may I say, Tom, uh, everybody knew that George Smith was very embittered and barking,
yeah.
and what he was saying was totally unfounded. And I mean, we're from a world that knows all about spiteful stuff. So let's be blunt about it. And Diana actually used that to get her divorce settlement jacked up from 2 or 3 million to 17 million. And that's the awkwardness that she and what that was really the blackmail tool that she used to up her and
Mm,
but if Sarah McCorkdale got rid of it, or she got her sister Jane to get rid of it, or someone else, good for her. Because the fact of the matter is, it was totally unfounded. It was just a malicious servant coming up with because he was disaffected, and also he had crossed swords with Michael Fawcett, and he
mm,
knew that Charles had a very clearly delineated relationship with Fawcett, which was Fawcett was indispensable to him. And
mm,
it wasn't because of anything carnal, so to speak. It was that Fawcett was very capable and was very adept at making Charles's life more agreeable. And so that's nothing to do though with Diana's death. That's
mm,
to do
mm,
with Diana's ability to blackmail Charles and
mm,
successfully do it. And then
mm,
if they got rid of that evidence, good for them, because
mm,
everybody knew it was completely unfounded. And
mm,
I mean, the idea that Charles was of that inclination and that he was of that inclination with Michael Fawcett is beyond ridiculous. But it also shows that Diana knew how to play dirty when it suited her and did it very effectively and successfully.
mm. So, Georgia, it's been so great. Thank you so much for having me on. I know I'm meant to be the guest, but I feel like I keep interrogating you. Can I ask you one other thing? Can you see Diana being alive, if Diana had lived, if Diana, the crash had never happened, right? She's in perfect health. She's gone on, she's had another relationship, whether with Dodie or someone else. But she would have continued, I suspect, being quite a vocal voice against Charles. Can you see a world with Diana still alive where we have Queen Camilla?
Yes, because ironically enough, and that's a wonderful question to ask. Thank you for asking it, because by the time Diana was dying, because remember the Panorama interview was in November 95. She died at the end of August 97. They were divorced in 96, by which time Diana was a total pariah in aristocratic and royal circles.
Yeah, worth remembering. Yeah.
Oh, very much, very important. And she was trying to claw her way back to some form of acceptability and respectability. And she was doing it quite successfully. She she made it absolutely clear to many people, me included, that she had no illusion but that Charles was going to marry Camilla, and she was happy to move on and have him move on, and it would be done with her. I don't know that blessings would be the right word, but she was cool about it all, and that she was leading her life, he was going to be leading his. So
Right.
but Diana was a very canny operator, and she knew that she had made an awful mistake with some of what she said in the Bashir interview. For instance, trying to deprive Charles of his right to the throne. And what people, I think, may not understand was the background to this, was that Diana, incredibly, and I am stunned that she was so naive as to believe what Bashir had told her. Bashir told her that the Queen was very ill and was going to be abdicating the following year. And that and so she believed this. I mean, I just don't know how any member of the royal family or anybody from our world could have believed such rubbish. And the Princess of Wales to believe it is almost defies logic. But anyway, she believed it. And all of this has come out in evidence, by the way, in the proceedings. And she believed it. And on the back of that, she thought, well, the Queen is going to retire, so to speak. Edward is going to die of AIDS, because he also told her Edward was going to die of AIDS. I mean, just again, so ridiculous. But it shows how gullible she was on some level. And so she does the Bashir interview with the ambition of knocking Charles out of the line of succession. So William will become king when Elizabeth II abdicates. And she is positioning herself to be regent. That's what that was all about. But the whole thing was insanity, because, and it literally was insanity, because Bashir had just made it up. She believed it hook, line, and sinker. And she ought to have known that as the divorced, well, she wasn't divorced at the time. So in fact, it was more logical that she would actually, I was going to say, must have realized that as the divorce of the Prince of Wales, she couldn't be regent, but as the mother of the king, and she wasn't divorced from Charles, she could be regent. So actually, it makes more sense when you stop to remember the time.
The sequence, yeah.
That's what that was all about. But I mean, it's and then she it all rebounds very adversely when she discovers the Queen isn't dying. Edward's definitely not dying of AIDS either, and he's still not died of AIDS. He's never had AIDS, and 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 at that point, all doors are shut to Diana,
Mm,
as her one or two friends like Rosa Monckton,
mm,
who incidentally Diana was dumping when she died, because
right.
Diana bitterly resented the way Rosa was speaking about Dodie on the yacht that my old friend Chrysanthi Lemos had lent Diana.
Right.
because Chrysanthi's husband Panagiotis was one of the Greek ship owners, the trip that they went on before.
Mm,
Diana
mm,
was so peed off with Rosa that she
mm.
was going to dump her. But Rosa, of course, has managed to massage that one, and is still an authority on things she didn't know anything about. But so there was all of that happening just at the time she died, where she was clawing back her respectability. But at the same time, Diana couldn't resist being mischievous. And she used to hoot with laughter and say things like, oh gosh, I mean, can you imagine the reaction at Balmoral when they see me swinging my legs in that bathing suit from the diving board? And I mean, she loved sort of provoking them.
Yeah,
So there
yeah.
was that as well. But she was, by the time
And I
she
mean, it was the ultimate provocation, wasn't it? Married Dodie. Oh
she
my God.
but but also Diana loved being loved, and Dodie
Yeah.
was trained to be a lover. And
Mm, mm,
so I don't know, that I used to say the one she should have married wasn't Dodie. She should have married Muhammad, because Muhammad would have known how to handle her. Dodie was just going to worship. Or But I think so. There
mm,
was all of that going on at the time of her death.
mm, mm,
And
mm.
as you made the point at the very beginning of this, that the press the day she died filled with negative stuff about her. And then they had to insert, oh, sorry, that awful
Mm,
woman is not the same person as
mm,
sanctified Diana who has just passed on.
mm,
Simply
mm,
looks exactly like her, has the
mm.
same name. I mean, ridiculous. But so
Yeah,
no, I
it's
think
crazy.
she'd have. Diana was basically a very canny operator, and
Mm,
she liked being. She liked the position. She liked the power. She liked the approbation. She loved being the superstar that she was. You don't
mm,
become that big of a superstar without working at it and doing it deliberately, you know. And
mm,
I
mm, mm.
but she'd made some serious errors of judgment and was clawing them back. And she was
Yeah.
very open about the fact that she expected Charles to marry Camilla, and that she was copacetic about it. And
Okay,
so
so I accept that she was okay with him getting married, but I do not think I just cannot see that everybody going along with this Queen Camilla thing. I just can't, and I just find it like it's just all way too convenient for the British royal family, in my opinion.
how do you
Like,
mean? How do you mean?
well, I just mean that if, look, if Diana had got a nice juicy deal with Netflix, I think she had such cultural weight. Like, as I was trying to say at the beginning, just remember the cultural footprint that Diana had. And yeah, there were plenty of people who thought, but there was still plenty, massive amount of people who had huge reservoirs of affection for her. And I just think that if Diana had been out there, militating against uh, King Charles and Queen Camilla, I just don't think they'd have ever been able to go through with this thing that they, in the oh, she's princess consort, oh, she's queen consort, oh, bing, she's queen. Like I just can't see it happening, because I think she would have been a focal point for the people, and there's plenty of people, by the way, who don't think it's right that Camilla is Queen Camilla, as you and I know. There are plenty of people. And I I just can't see that they'd have been able to get it through.
Well,
But
may I say, and I'm not saying this because her brother Mark Shand was a beau of mine and we were lifelong friends. It's got nothing to do with that. So I'm not defending her on personal grounds. But Diana knew, as did I, that she's the one who stepped out of line first. Charles didn't, she did. That's one important thing that the public may not be aware of, but Diana was, and I was, and other people were. Also, Diana was, by the time she died, she had accepted the fact that Charles would marry Camilla. And had she married Dodie or whomever else, she would have become Lady Diana Fiat. She would not have Diana, Princess of Wales. Diana had an opportunity to be a princess in her own right, which was in the negotiations for the divorce, when there were even wits at the palace saying that she should be made Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Clarence.
right.
But really, it was that she would be Her Royal Highness Princess Diana. Then she could have been Mrs. Tom Sykes, Mrs. Dodie Fayed, Mrs. whatever, right? But she then did the dirty with announcing she asked for an agreement for a meeting with Charles, and which was supposed to be confidential. And in the meeting, she offered to give up Her Royal Highness as long as she would remain Diana, Princess of Wales. And he agreed to consider that. And she left the meeting and announced it as a fact. And the Queen
I
said,
do think though, I'm
"What?
sorry, but I just to interrupt you, I just think it's always going to be a tough sell,
Mm,
you know, to say that Diana was anything other than she was completely the whole thing was completely wrong from the start. The idea that Charles was 32 and that she was 20 at the age of their marriage, you know, I know that's only a 12-year difference, but I've always liked the French theory that you know the youngest that your wife can be is half your age plus 7, you know. And I find the whole thing, it was just terrible. You look at those early photos of her in the, you know, she is a child, and she was brought into it. And I think I'm afraid I think you're on a losing wicket when you're trying to say that, you know, Diana did this or Diana did that, because I think that she was completely um I just think it was completely wrong to take a 20-year-old girl and make her the
Are
Princess
you
of Wales.
are you aware of the fact that Diana is the one who made the moves on Charles and not vice versa? And
Sure, she might have, but she was 20 years old. Like,
Johnny
it doesn't
Hart,
change the fact.
come
Like,
on. At 20 years old, I was extremely sophisticated, and
I'm
so
sure you are.
and
I'm
so
sure you are.
I mean, she wasn't some little working class girl from the Gorbals. She was born on the Sandringham estate. She was born into the royal world. She lived in it all her life, and she told Simon Berry before she knew Charles well. I mean, because she used to know the Edward and Andrew well, because they went to each other's
Mm,
parties, because they were all on the Sandringham estate. Because let's remember, until Johnny Spencer succeeded to the earldom, he lived at Park House on the Sandringham estate, and so did Diana. But she didn't know Charles or Anne well, because they were that many years older. And and then he was going out with her sister Sarah, and she met him
mm,
in No Bottle Field, and
mm,
he told Simon Berry when afterwards, when Sarah and Charles fizzled out, that
mm.
she would like to be the Princess of Wales or a dancer. so 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 let's
Mm.
the idea
But I
that
do think I do think that she's always, whatever our personal views on it, I think that in the court of, you know, public opinion, she's always going to be the 20-year-old nursery assistant, you know, the ingenue. That was very much how she was cast. And you know, I just think that she was a much. Remember also how incredibly unsympathetic a character Charles was. I
Yeah.
mean, the War of the Waleses was comprehensively won by Diana, in my opinion.
Mm.
Um, people did not like Charles, and they did like Diana, and I just think she could have caused lost problems for them. But that is,
Well, it's all
that's my view.
speculation now because I think to one extent you're right, Tom, because Diana was mischievous and she loved attention and she loved being number one. And I think that had she lived, she would have found ways and means of poking and provoking, and she
Mm.
certainly would have kept the Diana show on the road in various ways, shapes, and forms. But she was sufficiently canny to have understood that she had made a huge mistake, and she went. Listen, she even after we fell out, she even kissed and made up with me in public at the Russian ambassador's residence in, I think it was July 95, in front of
Right.
half the world. And there was a rota photographer, and she was determined to get for him to get a photograph of her and me so that she could make sure it was in the papers the following day, sort of Lady Colin Campbell kisses and makes up with Diana, because of course it would have been her, the spin would have been that I was doing well, while she spent the whole evening tracking me from room to room. And then when I realized what she was about, I positioned myself in such a way because I knew the venue better than she did. And the rota photographer was in the next room, and I allowed us to continue talking until I saw him come into the room. And at that point, I said, "Well, that's all very good and well. It's been wonderful to see you, marvelous to see you. We must be in touch about Moira, who used to do jewelry for me because Dan had admired something I wore." And I shot off like a bat from hell, so they wouldn't get the photograph. So you're right, she was very camera aware. She was very publicity seeking. She loved the attention, and she would doubtless have been a competitor. Because remember, she was being funded by Mohammed Fayed to have her
Mm.
own charity. And he
Mm.
had bought Julie Andrews' house for her and Dodie to live in Hollywood. People forget
Mm.
all of this.
Mm.
So
Mm.
she would definitely have remained very much a high profile figure. But
And can I just ask you, just before because I'm gonna have to go in a minute, so just before we finish, could I just ask you, like, overall, like, for you, like, obviously I know, like, it's not like us sitting around, but on the anniversary of her death, I mean, do you remember your time with her with fondness? Do you remember her as a kind of fun, interesting person, or did she? I mean, how do you remember her? Do you remember her with
well,
fondness?
I am I am actually ultimately supremely grateful to Diana, because but for Diana, I would never have been in the position to make the baby money to adopt my children. She's the one who said my book was baby money because she knew I wanted to adopt children. Because my book with her started out an as an authorized biography focusing on her charity work, which would be for benefiting three of her charities, which were three of mine. And I'd gone into the palace to see Dickie Arbiter. And anyway, to cut a long story short and not get into all of that, because it all changed with the passage of time. And as everybody knows, we sort of fell out quite magnificently. But we kissed and made up. And I have always been mindful of the fact that I owe Diana a great debt of gratitude, because but for her agreeing to do that book initially, and but for us coming up, it was originally my idea, not hers, but but she agreed to it. And but for that, I would never have written down in private. I wouldn't have had the money to be able to adopt my children and be financially independent. And it's more than fondness, it is gratitude, and gratitude is more than fondness. But there were things about Diana that I liked. She could be charming, she could be sweet, she had a gift of vulnerability, she had many wonderful virtues. But I was not blind to Diana as an all-encompassing individual. But I would say that no matter what the downside and the upside, ultimately I have remained very grateful to her, because it's that her original agreement for us to do the book that led to my being able to be financially independent of my family and adopt my children. So that's a heck of a debt that I owe her. So, well, Tom,
Well,
thank
that's a
you very much
lovely.
for all.
Thank you, Georgie. Thank you for having me, and it's brilliant to see you. And
keep up the good work, and I must say to everybody, join Tom's Substack and the Royalist. Tom is absolutely wonderful. He's got all sorts of wonderful connections, marvelous takes on things. We don't always agree on everything, but that doesn't mean that I would not sing his praises to the sky, because he deserves them to be sung. Okay, Tom, bless you, man.
thank you, Georgie. Bye.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I would encourage you to listen to what Tom has to say on his Substack, or read it, however Substack works. And also avail yourself of his wonderful information and sometimes really fascinating insights into what is going on the Royalist with the Daily Beast. Okay? And now I'm going to end with asking Sean to post another clip of that wonderful recital at Drew's Barn on the Warnham Park estate near Horsham last week, Sunday, in celebration of the Shipley Arts Festival by the Bernardi Music Group. Another really fabulous piece of music. Enjoy. Godspeed. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and take good care. Godspeed. Bye.
Great evening. Thank you, everyone. One, two, three. Black magic that you